Unplugged. Raw, real, and unplugged answers to all of your psychic, spiritual, and paranormal questions. Hosted by me, professional psychic medium Allison Boswell, and my sometimes skeptical sidekick Nick.
Hello again, podcast listeners. This is Nick, co-hosting with your favorite psychic medium, Allison. Today we are going to be having a great treat for all you animal lovers out there. We're talking about Apantomancy, divining the future by interactions with animals.
And in a more broad sense, Apantomancy is really divination via random signs and symbols. So animals is only maybe one kind of way of doing Apantomancy, but there's a lot of ways that you can do it. It's really a form of divination you probably haven't heard of, but still have likely used without knowing what it was at some point or another. It's really the divination performed via omens you come across by chance, and a form of this could be meditating until you start to receive random pictures, colors, words, etc. that you then need to interpret for yourself. So with Apantomancy, because it's based on random signs and symbols, there's a lot of room for interpretation, and therefore there can be a lot of room for frustration and error with people when they do this form of divination, but it's likely that a lot of us are doing this without knowing that we're doing it, especially if you're a superstitious person and have any kind of superstitions that have been passed down in your family. Any interpretation depends on the experience of the individual employing this technique. There is no real set guidelines or rules in terms of how to interpret what different objects mean. A common example of this form of divination is, as Nick referenced earlier, the interpretation of animal symbolism based on significant or chance encounters with animals. There are significant superstitions that still exist today because of this whole quote-unquote chance encounter with animals thing, and in fact, having any personal superstitions can be considered to be a form of Apantomancy, and these superstitions were born directly out of this form of divination. So one of the most popular forms of superstition born out of Apantomancy is the fabled black cat that crosses your path, which apparently is bad luck. And also seeing a buzzard meaning an omen of death. So basically Apantomancy kind of is divination by observation. Which is why I feel like everybody already does this, at least if you're spiritually open to any extent and you're actively looking for affirmation and validation with life choices, or you're seeking out spirit in your life, then of course you will find your way to Apantomancy, whether you know what this word means or not. The history of Apantomancy is an interesting one, with the most popular example referencing the story of the founding of Mexico City. Ancient Aztec diviners picked the site to build their new settlement, Mexico City, when they saw an eagle with a live snake clutched in its talons. It was taking off from a cactus. The coat of arms for Mexico City actually still shows a depiction of the founding of the city via the symbolism witnessed and interpreted through use of Apantomancy. You can view these images on a Wikipedia link that we have included in the episode description. That story for me was very fascinating when I discovered it, especially given the twisty-turny nature of Apantomancy, including superstitions. The fact that there's still a very well-known, popular city that was founded through Apantomancy, and that history, that legend, that lore is still very much appreciated and honored today, I thought was just amazing in terms of displaying, I want to say, the fortitude and the longevity of spiritual practices that have always existed, that were really in quote-unquote new age industry, finding our way back to old ways of doing things and old ways of practicing. So how does Apantomancy work? It's a very personal form of divination. You have to base the reading on your own personal experiences and weird synchronicities you have witnessed. To really be able to employ this form of divination on a regular basis, you would need to have some foundation of symbols and their meaning within your own accumulative knowledge over the years. And in intuitive development, I call this growth in spirit work, building your own Da Vinci Code. And I will use that reference a lot when doing intuitive development on one-on-one sessions or even in workshops. And you may have even heard me say this in videos or what have you, but the act of gaining understanding and taking the time to look up and learn every symbol as you encounter it creates that kind of pathway within your own brain that the recall is then faster every time you encounter the same sign and symbol. So it's worth the time And it really is, and you'll hear this from every spirit work practitioner or every practitioner within the spiritual, doing your homework is a thing, and it's very much worth the time and effort putting into doing the homework, because it becomes easier in understanding all of the weird paranormal, spiritual, psychic phenomena that you encounter on a daily basis. Know that the meaning you derive from symbols may not be what meshes up with historical interpretations of those same symbols. So I'm going to go back to that example that I shared earlier of that superstition of black cats crossing your paths, meaning it's going to be bad luck. That particular superstition, it doesn't ring true for everyone. I, for one, am a crazy cat lady, so I love all cats and actually feel really sad about the bad rap black cats get from this particular superstition. So for me, all cats represent what I've come to learn that they mean in animal symbolism, and that is creativity, individual expression, independence, and seeking solitude for deeper contemplation. So if a black cat crossed my path, for example, I wouldn't necessarily be looking over my shoulder waiting for something bad to happen, and I wouldn't be looking for that storm cloud to kind of come over my head and turn everything upside down in my life. I would be taking that as a positive sign in my life that I need to go my own way, like the black cat is going its own way in crossing my path. For others, it may be the very fact that historically, and here's another superstition, the number 13 is seen as unlucky, but perhaps for you, the number 13 is not. It may be a very powerful symbol, and you see that with some particular occult kind of practices, especially in witchcraft and different types of things, where the number 13 is seen as a powerful number and a powerful point of reference, and not necessarily that unlucky, we better not have a floor in our building be floor number 13. So when practicing Apantomancy, you want to start by asking spirits, the powers that be, your ancestors or whatever source of power or energy you feel most connected to, perhaps even your higher self, for signs in your daily lifestyle. Don't shy away from being specific. You can ask for a sign relating to what you are currently facing or going through. That helps you to know that the next sign you see may be directly related to your most recent query. And this actually gives me a bit of a flashback to our episode series that we did about the Ouija board, where I was saying when you do spirit communication, the more vague you are, the more vague your response will be. It's the same in this kind of form of divination as well as anything that's intuitive development or spiritual development practice. The more specific you are with your questions, or the more specific you are in letting spirit know what signs or symbols you're looking for, the more specific those signs and symbols and synchronicities will show up in your life. And then the act of interpretation and adding to your Da Vinci Code of signs and symbols will be a fun one and not necessarily an arduous task that will get you down. You have to self-evaluate whether any signs are coincidences, and this is where your gut instinct comes in handy, because not everything is spiritual. I know that that's strange hearing that from a professional psychic medium, and the job, the role of a professional psychic medium is one where you would assume somebody is kind of woo-woo all the time with their head in the clouds. And yes, my head is in the clouds most of the time, but maybe not because of talking to dead people or that kind of stuff. I'm just right-brained in that way. So I will be the first one to say that sometimes synchronicities or sometimes a sign that's coming forward isn't always a sign or a message. And the message is usually simple. It's not usually some big, convoluted, complicated thing. So don't go around, once hearing this wonderful episode, dear listeners, don't go around trying to find signs and symbols in everything. Make sure that you're still following your gut instinct. Make sure that you're still relying on any other spiritual, paranormal, psychic skills or abilities that you possess, and getting outside validation from a spiritual tool, an accessory to Apantomancy like cartomancy, using oracle cards or a tarot deck, or even seeing a reader of some kind may help you to get a better idea of how to measure within yourself whether something is valid or whether something just happens to be a coincidence. If you're unsure of what a particular sign means, don't get discouraged. Just reference that particular sign in books about symbolism, or one great resource that I absolutely love is I almost always go back to dream interpretation books. If you can find a good one, they're good for more than just dream interpretation. They're good for a lot of things. Or you can even just throw it into Google and see what pops up, because like these days in our society, we turn to Google for everything. I think one time, Nick, you even referenced it as Dr. Google. Like, it really does feel like Google is that advice column that you go to in life for information about everything. When you are seeking outside resources to better understand a sign, pay attention to what resonates with you. If your gut instinct is vibing with the interpretation you just discovered, or does something feel off? Being critical of this is helpful for building that Da Vinci Code I referenced earlier and to further your intuitive development. So don't just take every word that you find out there as gospel. Make sure to run it up the flagpole, so to speak, and check it against that gut instinct and check it against other tools and other sources and resources that you have at your disposal. Part of the act of building that Da Vinci Code is seeing what resonates and what doesn't and forming your own definitions. Like how I said earlier, that a black cat to me isn't bad luck. A black cat actually represents some very self-empowering energy and symbolism.
All right, cool. Very interesting. But now that our dear listeners know what Apantomancy is, how can they go about practicing this particular tool or type of divination for themselves?
So the key thing is to look for those signs, as I said earlier, and we're about to take a bit of a test drive with Apantomancy right now, just to give you guys some examples in order to further that spiritual and intuitive development so that you can see Apantomancy at work. Because honestly, there's no real way to spontaneously read via Apantomancy without starting with some kind of sign or symbol that's been discovered. But in the most handy fashion ever, of course, which always happens to Nick and I, we both happen to experience a sign in animal form almost immediately after I researched this form of divination and started on the show notes. For me, it was that same day that something happened. So within 2 days, we both got examples of it, and I actually went through the backlogs of my Ask inbox on Tumblr and found an old ask I haven't answered yet, yikes, about Apantomancy as well, and we will be going over that too. So I'm going to start with my little story, and feel free to pipe up at any time, Nick, if there's anything that catches your fancy. The day that I originally wrote the notes for the show, within hours of having worked on them, I was getting into our car to head to a dreaded dental appointment. Boo. I hate going to the dentist. As I put the keys into the ignition, a young cardinal flew at the driver's side window, landing for a moment right on the car, and then flew away. It definitely startled me at the time, but this is obviously a perfect example of Apantomancy, because what you want to look for specifically with animals is behavior that's outside of the norm. So you're not necessarily going to think every animal sighting is a form of Apantomancy, but this particular bird flew towards the car and landed like right where the window would roll down on the driver's side. And that's kind of weird. Like, it's not landing on the mirror, it's not landing near the car, it's like on the car. And there was one young cardinal on the car and there was another one flying behind it. So there was actually 2 cardinals that I saw that day. The fact that the appearance of the animal was random and unexpected, and in this case, the cardinal behaved outside of the norm, that was a clear sign of Apantomancy. Today, for all references to animals found via Apantomancy, I'll be using a book entitled Animal Spirit Guides by Stephen D. Farmer. A link to more information about this particular book is in our episode description if you wish to check it out for yourself. According to this book, one meaning of seeing a cardinal as a sign could be, this is a creative time, one where it's best to heed your intuitive guidance as to how to express this creativity. That particular definition resonated with me because we are currently, obviously, working very intensely on this new podcast project, producing episodes weeks in advance for all of you dear listeners. And this is all happening before our official launch still. So recently, for the first time in a long time, I've experienced bouts of insomnia because I've been overly creatively stimulated in my mind. And it has been years since I've felt this creative in my pursuits, especially related to my work. So that message totally hit the nail on the head. Some other definitions that didn't necessarily resonate with me included that someone needs your compassion and loving attention and is flaking you down to get it. I thought about Nick for maybe a fleeting second, and then I was like, nah, he's good. Because, he gets maybe too much of my love and attention, so it would need to be the opposite of that particular definition. Another one that didn't resonate with me was that a sign of a cardinal may mean that you need to add color to your life, home, and wardrobe, which I guess today I'm wearing black, so rant on that one, but at the time I was wearing a lot of brighter colors, so that one didn't necessarily resonate. And the final one that didn't quite make the mark for me was, this is a good time to make a fresh exploration of the religion you grew grew up in with your eyes and heart wide open. I have nothing against the religion I grew up in. In fact, I have a high level of appreciation for all religions and all spiritual practices, but I am finding myself in my personal spiritual and intuitive development coming to a period of time in my life and my journey where I can't ascribe to any one particular way of doing things. And I like to just think about connecting in spirit and being open to the possibility of all things without kind of labeling myself as any one thing. So that definitely didn't resonate with me. Although if I'm being true and honest to myself, it could maybe be a bit true. Because we did just finish recording the first installment of this Through the Looking Glass segment on bibliomancy, maybe about 2 weeks ago. And if you listen back to that episode, which we published on July 1st, the use of the Bible for example of bibliomancy kind of blew me away and left me totally in that zone of, OMG, should I start using the Bible in some of my spiritual practices? So, I mean, that could be legit. I don't know. That one left me scratching my head a little bit. So maybe legit, maybe not. But what I just did right there, dear listener, is what you would need to do when you're doing Apantomancy. I looked at all of the definitions. I looked it up in a resource that I happen to have in my home, but you can check it out on Google. And I picked up what resonated, but I kind of cataloged away the things that didn't so that I could return and go back to it at a later time. Here is our second example of Apantomancy. The day after I wrote about this episode, Nick and I were out for coffee up at Blue Mountain, and while finishing up our coffees after having heavily discussed the podcast for most of our date, lame, I know, a small sparrow flew up and hopped directly towards Nick from a small doorway open to the patio. We were actually inside of the coffee shop enjoying our drinks, and the sparrow ventured inside, literally beelining directly for Nick. The little baby sparrow, we theorized that it was a baby sparrow, had something in its beak and was looking at Nick curiously. We both immediately thought, OMG, Apantomancy at work again. So according to the same Animal Spirit Guides book I was using before, a sparrow can be a sign that this is a very productive and prolific time. And I mean, we're currently working on this podcast 7 days a week, people, and we're literally just talking about it during our coffee date before the sparrow hopped right up to Nick. So saying it's a very productive and prolific time, nail on the head for me. It may also mean your energy and vitality are awakening, and you find yourself whistling or singing without even being aware of it. Is that particular one true, Nick? Are you full of pep right now? It's okay to say no.
I can honestly say I have never been so enthusiastic in my life.
Was that your deadpan voice?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, the crazy thing is I do find myself whistling more often than I usually do. And I feel myself busy and going into new endeavors and whatnot. So, yeah, this is a pretty productive and
prolific
time in my life.
We are now going to segue into our follower-submitted story, originally posted via my Ask Me Anything inbox, powered by my Tumblr account. I know, Tumblr is a bit of a polarizing outlet for social media, but I still use it because people are still contacting me through it, and I think it's a good resource to actually talk about these spiritual things that not everybody will talk about and discuss. But if you want to learn more about that, there is a link in the description of this episode for this podcast that will take you directly to my Tumblr account for you to check out a little bit more about that. And the ask that was submitted by a follower goes a little something like this. Hello, Miss Allison. I've had some funny things happen. 5 turkeys crossed the road in front of me. I thought it was rather amusing, considering it's not close to Thanksgiving at all, and I seem to keep finding dimes everywhere. Thanks, Ron. Well, first of all, Ron, I like being called Miss Allison. I'm going to put that out there for the world to know. And that's interesting that turkeys crossed your path and it wasn't even close to Thanksgiving, and there were 5 of them. Referring again to our handy dandy volume of Animal Spirit Guides, there are some interesting interpretations for the animal symbolic meaning of a turkey, one of which is it's important to transcend the focus on your own needs to consider the greater needs of the whole, such as your family, community, or world. You're about to receive a gift of some kind, material, spiritual, or intellectual. That could be anything from winning the lottery to a simple gift such as witnessing a beautiful sunset. Perform some act that honors the earth, whether a sacred ceremony or simply picking up trash. Volunteer your time in selfless service for some organization that you want to support. Now, I think I know which Ron this is, wink wink nudge nudge, and if this question was anonymously submitted by who I think it was submitted by, these messages are so on point, it's scary, because the Ron I'm thinking of is freaking awesome and so full of spiritual energy and healing potential that it only makes sense that Spirit would continue to encourage Ron to share the energy he possesses with those around him. These kind of bigger universal signs and interpretations just kind of happen to those of us that are spiritually connected. The amount of encouragement we gain in Spirit to actually go forth and do the work is staggering and incredible. But we're not done yet, because now we need to pair these messages with other symbols that were witnessed in that example that I gave you guys, like the fact that there were 5 turkeys and the finding of dimes. So I'm going to show you guys right now how you take Apantomancy to the next level, where you not only look at the symbol itself, but you look at other descripting factors or things occurring in accessory to the symbol. First, we'll delve into the number 5, and this is just a little bit of numerology for a second, so stick with me here. We'll be turning to that particular practice in order to perform a very simple initial assessment of the situation. I actually wrote a fairly extensive post in response to another ask that was submitted anonymously on Tumblr ages ago, and somehow that post became my most liked and reblogged original post ever. I'm still scratching my head about that, so I'll be referencing what I said in that post to explore the symbolism behind the number of turkeys. But if you want to see that numerology post for yourself, check out the link we've provided in the episode description. In numerology, the number 5 usually represents change, transition, and transformation. It may even allude to any form of barrier, hurdle, or resistance you are experiencing with decisions you are currently facing. Spirit may be sending you this number to remind you that change is inevitable in life, and as encouragement that you really need to try to roll with the punches. Spirit really wants you to believe and know that not all change is bad, and not all change is good. Change is simply change, and change can allow for some new doorways of opportunity to open up for you. Now, pairing the meaning behind the number 5 with the symbolism inherent with the turkeys that was mentioned before points to the fact that there could be changes happening within your family dynamic that you haven't anticipated, or your role within this world as you see it, taking into account your spiritual gifts and abilities, may also be changing. Ultimately, whatever the 5 part of the message means needs to be left up to you. So that's the thing with Apantomancy. I'm giving little breadcrumbs here, listeners, but you have to really take what resonates and leave what doesn't, as I said with the intuitive development advice I gave earlier about how to do Apantomancy. And finally, I'm going to address the finding of dimes, because the entire message submitted by Ron was that there were 5 turkeys and dimes everywhere. Finding dimes is actually a pretty universal message in spirit, and usually it means that someone or something is trying to get your attention to serve as guidance or validation about the choices you are currently facing and the path you may find yourself on today. It's very common to believe that dimes can be signs sent directly from deceased loved ones as well, and when you think about it, the number 10 in numerology symbolizes coming full circle, the ending of one journey and the beginning of another. It may also denote energies of leadership, optimism, confidence, independence, success, determination, and individuality. Either way, discovering random dimes while witnessing the other sign of 5 wild turkeys crossing your path can only mean that spirit is doubling, or maybe in this case tripling, down on those messages to you, really trying to prove to you that the signs and messages are all around you. And I just can't shake this feeling that you are truly being called for a higher purpose, Ron, or higher vibrational work. Take that however you wish to, which is definitely the whole point and journey through understanding and interpreting signs of Apantomancy. And hopefully, dear listener, if some of this message may have resonated with you, and if you're randomly listening to a podcast like wink, wink, nudge, nudge, Spirit Unplugged podcast, which is awesome, and something resonates with you deeply to your core, how could that not be a sign of Apantomancy? Because it's a random thing you're encountering that has a deeper meaning for you. And I wanted to especially throw in that little bit of interpretation for meaning of dimes there for a moment, because finding dimes is huge when you're opening up in spirit. I know a lot of people find dimes, so I wanted to address that side of Apantomancy too. What the heck does it mean when you find a dime? Well, now you guys know, right? And you're prepared to tackle the next time that you get that. And hopefully what was discussed today has just been added into your inner Da Vinci Code for intuitive and spiritual development, which will hopefully lead to a level up in spiritual understanding and psychic ability and phenomena.
So, Allison, I can't help but remember there are some instances of Apantomancy in our own past and in your past. Would you like to talk about a few of those instances?
Well, there's kind of a really obvious one that's happened recently that we disagree a little bit on. I believe it's a sign, and you believe it may be a coincidence. So that's a cool thing about Apantomancy. As I said, you always have to self-assess enough to know that something is a coincidence versus legit the real deal. But technically, while recording this episode, we haven't officially launched yet, which I know is one of those mind-blowing things as a listener that we're working that far in advance, but it's because of a scheduling thing, so we have to kind of do that. While preparing for our launch and recording over the last little while, I feel like there have been little nuggets of wisdom and signs left by Spirit that we are so meant to do this podcast. And maybe by the time that this actually airs, we will have received that validation from the people listening, but who knows? Not necessarily in this for that validation, but it would be nice sometimes when you receive the signs in spirit. So one of those signs that are directly related to this podcast is that randomly out of nowhere, a place that I used to work for one summer posted on Facebook this event invitation that they were having this well-known award-winning podcaster from Toronto come for a talk and a demonstration. And I learned about this, I think maybe 2 weeks ago. So this is like mid-June that I learned about it. And it was right on the heels of me going through a weird up and down roller coaster period where I would have some days where I was super jazzed for this podcast to come out and I couldn't wait to interact with all of you and I was just really all about the podcast. And then I would have days where I was legit exhausted because, as I've said, we're working like 7 days a week right now on this podcast for all of you guys. And I would have those moments of doubt, which is totally normal, where I was like, is this gonna, get up off the ground? Are people even gonna want to listen to us talk for any amount of period of time? So then right around the time I was questioning all that stuff, and I didn't necessarily pose the question to Spirit, but I was thinking real hard in my head about all those kinds of things, and they kind of take up residence, or they rent space out of my own head, so that may be how they learned about it. I was doubting those things, and then all of a sudden this random event came up for this podcast, and there was a second sign about the podcast. I'm trying to remember what it was now. Nick, do you remember? Because I know that there's been 2 signs about podcasting in the last few weeks.
I can't think of anything.
What was it? What was that second sign of podcasting? Okay, I've got it. I remember now. The second sign was somebody approaching me to set up an interview where I am a guest on a podcast. So that, based on chronology and time and everything, that may have actually already happened and gone live by the time that this shows. But while we're recording it, we don't know if it's fully gonna happen. But that was the second sign, is that within a week after that sign happening, someone approached me to ask me to be a guest on a podcast. And I do some media stuff, but I mostly do radio and I do like television every once in a while. And the bulk of my time is like live lecture, live workshops, that kind of thing. So this would be the first time that I've been approached to be a guest on a podcast. Just the timing of all of it. And the episode that I was asked to do for that guest spot would be happening within a month after we launch this podcast. So the timing. Sometimes I feel like, and this is a big part of Apantomancy, sometimes I feel like Spirit lines stuff up almost like dominoes in a way that when something is so right for you, Spirit gives that first initial domino a flick, and then all these pathways and doorways open up to you. that you're not even expecting. And there's been a few times in my life where that's happened. The first being when I first came into this line of work as a full-time psychic medium. So I was basically in a corporate career in, let's say, August. And by October, November, I was doing this work full-time and under contract for an amazing promoter for shows all throughout the year. And this is now the second time in this particular career and field that I've been in where I feel like so many doorways of opportunity and signs and symbols are coming forward that are telling me and urging us, Nick, to do this podcast thing. So I know that it might be boring because that's another podcast sign, and you received that podcast sign with that sparrow buddy that wanted to hang out with you and somehow feed you the food in its beak. I thought that was the cutest thing ever.
It's my little sparrow friend.
I know. I'm gonna have to start calling you Nick Sparrow.
Well, I do look good in a tricorn hat.
Yes, you do. You sure know how to fill out a tricorn hat.
Now, I do have another question, Allison, and I'm sure this is something that is in the forefront of a lot of our listeners' minds. How do you separate legitimate apantomancy from everyday interaction? Like, we can't expect that every time our cat passes us in the hall that it's a sign from spirit, can we?
True, and you can't expect that every seagull flying over your head or bird that craps on you is a sign or a symbol either. I think it's very important when doing anything spiritual or intuitive or psychic that you try to remain open in both left and right brain, so to speak. So despite allowing this woo-woo out there stuff that's intangible to take over, you want to stay scientific, logical, and assessing and discerning enough that you're not necessarily believing on first shot a sign that comes forward. So, for example, when it comes to personal signs and symbols and how I work that through with my spirit guides, I don't necessarily take one sign as the message. It's almost like I need to be beat over the head with the message and all the signs and symbols before I'm like, I guess that's something. So in the example I just gave about the podcast signs and symbols, I didn't take the first one about this random lecture workshop that popped up with this guy from Toronto. I didn't take that as like, we're on the right path, we're doing the right thing. I haven't even fully taken the second sign of being asked to guest on a podcast as the sign. It's like I'm still waiting for the third or fourth sign. So sometimes quantity is a thing, and you don't necessarily want to take your pet crossing your path as the sign, and you don't necessarily, in the pet example, want to take your pet ever crossing your sign because they just live in the same house as you. You want to take signs that are repeating or signs that are just so strange and bizarre and out of the blue that it has to mean something deeper. So like I said earlier, not everything is spiritual. But that was a great question, Nick. Because I feel like sometimes, and I'm going to be blunt here for a second, I feel like sometimes people look for signs and symbols and things where there isn't one. And they try to make something into more.
So, just to be clear, a goat running up to you and chewing on your pants at a farm, maybe not a sign, but a goat running up to you in Walmart, maybe a sign?
I'm going to go a step further with that, because what if the goat is running up to you on a farm that doesn't have goats? Right? It needs to be anything that's strange. Or what if the goat's running up to you chewing on your pants and it's usually penned in a certain spot and it's not necessarily one of those goats that are like Houdini escape artists, because that apparently is a thing. I've watched videos of that on YouTube.
Rogue goat.
Oh my god, I love it. There's got to be something there, like in RPG gaming, being a rogue goat. Or being a rogue that has a goat. We're talking D&D now here. I'm segueing because we're such huge nerds. But yes, a goat running up to you in Walmart would be a sign or symbol. So I'll give you another one. And it's involving livestock, but it's not goats. Remember that time recently where we were driving through Barrie and we were with my parents and they were driving the car and there were these two ponies on harnesses in the middle of the city that went across the sidewalk?
Yeah, and they're just being walked like dogs.
Yes. Like, when do you see ponies in the middle of a metropolitan area? So your example is totally right. It's not necessarily a goat on a farm coming up to chew your pants that's the sign, but two ponies on harnesses being walked across a crosswalk in the middle of a huge mega metropolitan city. Yeah, that's a sign.
So where do you feel Apantomancy measures up to other forms of divination like tarot or runes or maybe, the reading of cheese? How do you think this is in regards to other divination forms that you tried?
I feel that comparing forms of divination is a very personal experience because everyone will find their form of divination that truly resonates with them. And it may even be a form of divination that's an extension of their own personal interests, but it also may be a form of divination where they feel the most intense spiritual energy or the most intense connection within themselves. But in general, how do I feel about Apantomancy comparing to tarot or something else? Well, I feel like Apantomancy minus the technical term that we've been using. So I had coined it divination by observation earlier. I feel like that is actually as mainstream as tarot or reading oracle cards or any of that kind of thing. But I don't feel it's necessarily as structured as the practice of tarot or the practice of reading oracle cards, or your example was reading cheese, I guess. Divination by observation, or Apantomancy as we've been calling it, is really unstructured in the way that it happens because you only really engage in that extra level of intuitive development by trying to interpret the signs and symbols after you've received them. I don't think it crosses a lot of people's minds to ask for the signs and symbols, and maybe it does when you're a little bit further in your spiritual journey, but there's no reason why you can't always be asking for the signs and symbols. Just make sure that when you are asking, you're not putting contingencies on it. Like, I want more money in my life. I'm gonna try to manifest that. So please give me signs and symbols about the fact that I should be a billionaire. It's like, be specific with your questions, but don't block spirit off from using a different route to deliver a message to you. But yeah, if I were to compare it to other forms of divination, I just think Apantomancy or divination via observation is just super accessible, and maybe even more so than things like tarot, because I read tarot, I really appreciate the tarot, and I have a high level of respect for tarot, but it's not exactly the easiest system for a lot of people to learn. It can be fairly complex and multi-layered, and then there's reading the tarot based on the symbolism and everything you've learned versus reading tarot based on intuition. Apantomancy or divination via observation just seems a little bit more like a gateway, a doorway into learning about yourself spiritually and initial steps in intuitive development. And with that, we have come to the end of this amazing second segment of Through the Looking Glass about Apantomancy. Thank you so much for hanging in there with us and listening. We absolutely love and adore you. If you know of some cool, interesting, weird, or creepy forms of divination you'd like us to explore, let us know. Feel free to also mention any common or more mainstream forms of divination. For example, we mentioned the tarot today and runestones, but also there are pendulums and crystal balls and that type of thing. Email all of your suggestions to spiritunpluggedpodcast@gmail.com. Tune in to our next episode, which may not come during our normal every 2-week stint because we are into our crazy traveling schedule. So we are going to be taking a few weeks off here and there. But the next time you tune in, we will be covering our Halloween special. And I don't want to ruin too much of the surprise for you guys because, this is a spiritual, paranormal, psychic podcast. Halloween is kind of a big deal. So don't expect our normal format or normal things that we're doing. We've got something like brand new for you guys, and we are both super excited about it. In the meantime, if you want to learn more about our production schedule and learn about upcoming episodes and get a bit of a sneak peek about that, check out our episode description for a link involving supporting the podcast. If you become one of our patrons on Patreon, and I believe the lowest level you have to be in order to gain access to our production schedule is only $1 a month, then you can learn about what this super special Halloween is going to be about before everyone else. Kind of cool, huh? Thank you so much, everyone, for listening. We will catch you next time.
Thank you for listening to us on Spirit Unplugged. If you have questions about our content, guests, or future episode requests, email us at spiritunpluggedpodcast@gmail.com. Subscribe to our podcast on Apple iTunes or Google Play. And join us next time when you need to unplug.